we went over the Washington Wizards last week, and I'm like, they couldn't have possibly be the worst franchise in NBA history, right? Then I went over, looked at the Washington Wizards. We were like, wow, Marcin Gortat led you guys in win shares 3 straight years. That's pretty tremendously bad. However, the Washington Bullets at least won a finals. You at least got to a second round consistently, and at least in the John Wall and Bradley Beal era, you're more competitive than the Kemba Walker and Al Jefferson era. Al Jefferson traded from the Celtics, goes to the Timberwolves, and then gets thrown over to the Charlotte Hornets. And then it's just been a team where Michael Jordan is there, I guess, but they just really haven't been able to do anything. And now we're going to go over the Charlotte Hornets' abysmal history and see if it's time for Adam Silver to step in and see if we think if their top 12 teams are going to be worse than the Wizards. So we've gone over the Pistons, we've gone over the Wizards, now we have the Hornets, probably the Magic coming up next year, and we're just going to create a tournament after this. And after we go over all the teams that we agree are some of the worst franchises in NBA history, then we'll go ahead and create a tournament out of it in a couple of weeks here. But Charlotte Hornets, abysmal. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think that they'll have a better top 12 all time, but I do think that their history is going to be worse because at least the Wizards were good in the Coke era. This team didn't even exist in the Coke era. So I believe, if I remember correctly, they started in the late 80s with the Heat. And with that, they had the Alonzo Mourning era, they had the Kemba Walker era, and now they're in the LaMelo Ball era. So that's really been their history, but I'm not entirely sure how their playoff success has. If I'm not mistaken, they've never made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, and their history has been pretty mediocre to this point. Maybe not to the level of the Wizards, but I think just looking at it blindly, I think the Hornets, they have a good matchup against those Pistons and Wizards.
Yeah, so first of all, with the Charlotte Hornets, it's bad from the start because you start out as the Charlotte Hornets and then you're like, you know what? We don't want to be the Charlottes anymore. We're not feeling that punchy sting from that name. Let's go ahead. And then after we're the Hornets for a little bit here, the first year that they're the Bobcats is, let me take my sunglasses off to read, is in 2002. You go from the Charlotte Hornets, and then it goes from 2004 to 05. You turn into the Charlotte Bobcats.
Forgot about that era.
You shouldn't have been Bobcats. You should have been Kitty Cats in that era, because the best team you had in that era lost in the first round. You go basically your first 6 seasons without making it to the playoffs, and then you lose in the first round of the Eastern Conference Finals, and then you change your name back to the Hornets after being the Charlotte Bobcats, which makes no sense to me.
Which is hilarious because there was the New Orleans Hornets in that time. But the New Orleans Hornets is the Pelicans history, and the Pelicans history goes back to the Hornets. So how these mesh together, it's very fascinating.
Yeah.
But the Bobcats era was heinous. I'm glad that they got out of the Cats era. Just anything, whether it be the Panthers, whether it be for a long period of time, the Seahawks in the 90s were really bad. Like just birds in general, especially
the Jaguars.
Yeah, just birds never pan out.
Yeah.
Or cats in this case.
Yeah, so basically the Charlotte when they were the Bobcats, though, they went to the playoffs 3 straight years was their best run. Lost in the first round. Then they had 2 years where they lost in the semis, where Paul Brown was the best player on their team. And then they also had Baron Davis. And then we go another couple years once we split to the Hornets. And then we make it to the playoffs in 2009 and to 2010.
Where they lost in the first round.
We go 4 years missing the playoffs, and then in 2013 and 14, you go 43 and 39 with Big Al Jefferson and Kemba Walker at the helm there. End up getting swept by the Miami Heat, and then this is the first year that Steve Clifford is your head coach, and he coached the team for looks like 5 years to start it, and then you miss the playoffs again, then you make it back to the playoffs in 15-16, and you lose in the first round again. And then ever since then, you have not made it back to the playoffs. And then we go Kemba Walker as your best player. He ends up leaving, goes to the Celtics. And then after he leaves, your top win share goes from Cody Zeller, like
Hornets legend,
apparently, Cody Zeller. And then you go to Kemba Walker, or Kemba, you go to Terry Rozier after he signed there. Fine player, but should he be the best player on your team? Absolutely not. Then you have Mikal Bridges as the best player on your team as far as win shares. And then after him, last season in 22 and 23, you have Mason Plumlee as your best player.
Sad.
And the worst part of the past 2 years is I haven't seen this happen in the NBA before, at least not in my timeline, but you go 4 years with the new head coach after having Steve Clifford for 5 years, and then you rehire him as your head coach?
That's never happened in my lifetime.
What dirt does Steve Clifford have on Michael Jordan?
I don't know. All I know is that let's look at the Steve Clifford era, because I'm looking at very far away from here. I'm seeing that. Let's look.
So he
He made 2 playoff appearances in 5 years, and he lost in the first round both times. And then his last season there,
they go 36 and 40. They go 36 and 46 back-to-back years. Then he gets fired.
he gets fired. And then they have a period of time with the new head coach. He gets fired. And then Steve Clifford comes back and he goes
27 and 55 and 16 and 48.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if he's going to get fired again. They're going to replace him with Doc Rivers, and then he'll come back for the third time. Everybody knows that everyone loves a good trilogy. So maybe.
Yeah.
But 2 playoff appearances in 7 years. I don't know what he knows about Michael Jordan. I know Michael Jordan sold the team last year, but what do you how do you hire a guy 2 times in the span of 5 years?
This is like, honestly, this is like if the Bengals hired Marvin Lewis after firing Zach Taylor, if they ever fired him. It's like the Bengals, much better franchise, but they're like, you know what? Marvin Lewis, it wasn't so bad, right? We just lost in the first round every single year.
Look, this is not a dating show, but give you a bit of advice here. If you and your girlfriend break up and there's a 5-year gap and you guys get back together, chances are it's not going to work out. You guys broke up for a reason.
Yeah.
So for this, you fire Steve Clifford because he was not the right guy. You gave him, 3 years of a breakup period where you guys just took a break from each other. You come back, and it's been worse since then. Some of these players who are still on the Hornets, still there. Whose idea was it to rehire him? Was it Michael J. Jordan? Who knows? All I know is that the Hornets are a disaster.
Yeah, the Hornets are a disaster there. And then, so they topped the Wizards, though, because they had 3 straight years of making the playoffs. So that was better than the Washington Wizards were able to do there. However, you rehire Steve Clifford. You've lost in the first round. At least the Wizards were good in the Coke era, and they won a championship as the Bullets. And at least they can have proven that they can get to a second round here. So now it's time that we've gone through our history lesson. We've gone through them getting back together with Steve Clifford. Let's see how good that top 12 really is. And at number 1, no surprise, maybe a surprise for some people, but Kemba Walker, UConn legend himself, as the best player in their history. Is that good? No.
That's better than the Wizards, though, right? You'd like to think, right?
No, I would take Bradley Beal in his prime over Kemba.
That's true. Bradley Beal was number 1. Well, he was also on the Hornets for like a decade, and it was just that period of mediocrity where they made, 3 playoff appearances. Kemba Walker as your 1, I'm not surprised, but let's see the rest of this list.
Yeah, and then we have Gerald Green, who on this list isn't in a Hornets uniform. He's in a Celtics uniform for some reason.
Oh, Jared Wallace.
Jared Wallace, sorry.
Jared Wallace. Yeah, I honestly forgot he existed. I remember him back in the day when I was watching basketball as a kid, but I do think of him as a Celtic. I don't think of him as a Hornet. So it's funny that we say that.
Yeah, he's like one of those hustle guys, though. Like, he had some like big games. He could get hot, but he was really just a big hustle guy. He was on the Bobcats, kind of a legend there, but like still not like someone who should be even your 3 on a championship team. So Gerald Wallace at 2. And then for all the short kings out there, we have Muggsy Bogues, who looks like if Grant Williams was shrunk in a lab, known as famously the shortest player in the NBA for a game that relies on height, not necessarily someone you want to be your 3rd best player of all time. Kind of like having Nate Robinson in your top 12 there. But for all the short kings out there, Muggsy Bogues, congratulations.
Hey, Muggsy Bogues, 5'3", legend here. We're talking about best shortest player of all time. If Michael Jordan was 5'3", could he be as good as Muggsy Bogues? That is a conversation that somebody somewhere has probably had. But that's Muggsy Bogues. I mean, if you want to play 2K and build the shortest team, Muggsy Bogues is probably going to be your starter.
Yeah, he's one of them, along with Draymond being your center. And then we have Larry Johnson, a top 3-4 guy, and his name is Larry, and his last name is not Bird. I'm all set.
How many win shares does he have?
How many win shares? 41.1.
Okay, so he's like
It's
a pretty
okay.
average player. That's when you think about the Hornets' time, we're going to think about the Alonzo Mourning era, and we're going to think about that time his number 2 being Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson, he was a fine player in the 90s, but by no means were they setting the world on fire, consistently making the first and second round. So forgettable person in history.
Yeah, forgettable player. And then at 5, we have Del Curry, who's known for being the father of Steph Curry. He was a good player, good shooter. Give him credit for having Steph Curry and being able to develop him to being one of the best players in NBA history. But I, I don't know. He's still like a spot up corner 3 guy. I didn't see most of these older guys play, Del Curry included, but whew, not someone you want in your top 5.
Del Curry is a role player. And in his time, he was mostly a role player. He was more of like a shooter. He was kind of equivalent to like Steve Kerr on the Bulls
Yeah.
in the Spurs. Like he was a shooter, but him being your number 5, that shows, first of all, how long he was on the Hornets and also how bad the Hornets are historically.
Yeah, it's like, ooh, is Danny Green in the Spurs top 12? I'm pretty sure that is not the case.
No.
And then after that, we have the one and only, the legend in Charlotte himself, Cody Zeller at number 6. And I feel like him being in the top 12 players of all time, that's where this list should end. Because of Cody Zeller is at number 6 there, who looks like a balding math teacher. Like, what are we doing?
You know what he really is, though? He's a taller Alex Caruso.
Kind
Tell
of.
me he doesn't look like Alex Caruso. If you took a double take, you're like, oh, is that Alex Caruso? Nope, another bald white boy.
Yeah, just put a headband on him. Yeah, another. What is with all these? Why are all the white guys coming into the NBA that are mediocre balding? Like, I don't get it. Like, Gordon
grind.
Hayward has good hair, but like all like the role hustle players are all going bald. I don't get it. What is going on?
Austin Reeves, make sure you have a good hair transplant.
Yeah,
Because right now you have precious locks, but it won't be like that forever.
it won't be like that forever. And it's like, so to make the NBA as a white guy now, you have to lose your hair. Is that the deal you have to make?
All right, I got to start losing my hair.
Yeah, time to start. Yeah, I guess it's time for me to cut my hair and look like I'm going bald. But let's roll through the rest of this list real quick. We have Anthony Mason at number 7.
Who was a draft bust.
Glenn Rice at number 8.
That was great in the 90s.
We have Marvin Williams. I mean,
Another bust.
another bust.
Part of one of the worst drafts in NBA history. I believe he was in the Andrea Bargnani draft. I'll double check that. Not a good player.
Yeah, and then we have, let me see.
Is that Amika Okafor?
Amika Okafor here
The cousin of Jaleel Okafor.
at number 11.
And then I think ends it's Alonzo.
Yeah, why is Alonzo Mourning at the end? Was he just old there at the end of his career? It's like
I
a
think
last deal?
I think he just left. I'm pretty
Huh.
sure. I don't know the full history. I just know Alonzo Mourning. When you think of the Hornets like great players, I think of Alonzo Mourning, but he did leave to go to the Heat and did a lot more there than there.
Yeah, I mean, Miami definitely a better place to be there, but better franchise. But the Charlotte Hornets, gone over it. Absolutely disastrous franchise. It is now time for Adam Silver to take a legitimate look and see what is wrong with the Hornets and potentially go over them, rebranding, selling the team, investigating why Steve Clifford was drafted twice, and then seeing why they can't draft good players in their top 12. I don't get it, but